Who's in the lobby? Oh, Bear's in the lobby.
Okay, well, that's not my job to
Set up teams.
How do I do that?
How do I do that? Bear's in the lobby.
All right, can she go?
Okay, we are calling the meeting of the Kyle Housing Authority to order. The time is 4 p.m. and roll call.
Garza. Present. Armstrong.
Present.
Orgish.
Present.
Great. Second item, approval of minutes. We're considering the approval of the Kyle Housing Authority July 17th, 2025 regular meeting minutes. And then, is there a motion to approve them?
I make motion.
Anyone second?
I second.
Any discussion? Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. All opposed? Excellent. Motion passes. Item 3, citizen comment period. The Kyle Housing Authority welcomes comments from citizens early in the agenda of regular meetings. Speakers are provided with an opportunity to speak during this time period on any agenda item or any other matter concerning Housing Authority business, and they must observe the 3-minute time limit. Do we have any citizen comments? Yes, strange man back there.
Hi, Bear Heiser, for the record. I just want to thank you guys all for your service. I'm very excited to see what this body can do, and I feel lucky, and the city should feel lucky that the three of you are sitting up here to help get this board on track. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any other citizen comments? All right, seeing none, we will move on to number 4, staff reports and presentations. Item number 2. It looks like Miss Truelove.
I had to figure out how to get this microphone turned on. So item number 2, we have a presentation for, we have brought forward the Housing Authority of the City of Austin. They're here to give us a quick orientation on some of the responsibilities related to being a Housing Authority board, and we have Michael Roth with the Housing Authority for the City of Austin who is here to deliver this presentation.
Sorry, missed it. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Again, my name is Michael Roth. I am the Vice President of Pathways Asset Management for the Housing Authority of the City of Austin. And in that role, I oversee the property management of our historic public housing properties in the City of Austin. And what I'm coming here to before you today with this presentation is very much a very high-level overview. There are several other trainings that I would like to recommend to you that you consider as new commissioners and new board members. Put out through the trade industry, through the National Association of Housing and Rehabilitation Officials, NARO, has several trainings. There's a virtual, online, on-demand training on ethics, and another one also on the roles and responsibilities of housers and housing commissioners. I would strongly encourage you. The one's about an hour, the other's about an hour and a half, so easily done, and I can provide that and share that material with you as well. As we jump into the presentation here, there's 4 categories I kind of want to touch on in the overview. But keeping in mind that with the Housing Authority, the overarching governing body is the Board of Commissioners. You'll have your executive director, and then you have your staff that are providing all the different roles within the agency. And obviously, your staff is doing that frontline day-to-day work. Thank you.
That guy should work for you.
Okay. And the executive director is implementing the procedures, policies, and directives. The board is the one who's setting that direction and approving that. So there's a governance role that we'll talk about with that. And related to that also is a direction role. What is the direction we want to go with as a housing authority? What is our role? What are we carrying out? What do we see as we look forward and plan and being strategic with what we're doing as an agency? Also making sure that there's proper put things in place for risk management. You know, are there controls? Are there safeguards for our assets? And understanding our assets and what are our resources as an agency, as well as program compliance. And we'll talk about that in greater detail a little bit further. And then finally, legal and ethical responsibilities of the board. And this is where I would also direct you back to one of those trainings I referenced particularly on the ethics of housing and housing commissioners. There's a responsibility to ensure the viability and the future of the agency. At the end of the day, we often talk about at our agency, it's all about the residents. It's all about the families and the people that are living in our properties. And that needs to be in the back of our minds for all of us, for staff as we're making decisions and acting, for an executive director as he or she is making decisions, and it's especially for a board of commissioners as we're setting policies and directions. So looking at some of that role of governance, policy. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated here for the Kyle Housing Authority, because while we have two properties that are HUD subsidized properties, they are in two different HUD programs, which means there are different policies related to each program. One would think that everything subsidized by HUD would have a common denominator, and there's elements that are common, but there are significant differences between the two programs. And so understanding the different policy requirements and policy documents is important. And because on an annual basis, and as changes get made to those governing documents, it's the board that has to set the final approval of those policy documents. In addition to that, also your personnel policies, your financial management policies, to make sure that we're running in good order and with good governance. On the financial end of governance, the budgets. Approval of budgets is final authority to approve budgets rests with the commissioners. And so the staff will develop, the executive director or financial officers will bring them and present those budgets to you, answer your questions, but ultimately the approval and the authority to approve lies with the Board of Commissioners. In addition, there's the opportunity to assign assigning authority to make purchases. And depending on the procurement policy of the agency, there may be certain thresholds that require a board approval even to make the purchase. I know in our housing authority, any purchase over $100,000 requires, any contract over $100,000 requires board approval in a board meeting. That depends on your procurement policy. That's a policy we have set. But again, it ties to making sure that we are maintaining the direction of the agency, the viability of the agency, and that this large purchase and large expenditure of money is in the best interest of the residents that we're serving, the agency that we're serving. Finally, also there's the oversight of the executive director and the hiring, the oversight, ensuring that that person, that individual is actually implementing the policies and the directions of the agency. And I'm going to keep moving forward, but please feel free to stop and we can make this more of a dialogue and discussion, but I'm happy to just keep going unless there's things you want to ask about. As far as the planning and direction, setting the direction for the agency, strategic planning is always an important element, and that requires a combination of working together with staff and your executive director and working with the other entities within your community and within your city to make sure that the agency is still moving in the direction that we want it to go. But more than just setting the direction, while that is absolutely important and necessary, it's actually having the information being brought to you on a regular basis to ensure that the agency is still heading in that direction. A monthly report just giving a snapshot in time, there's value to that. But more value is those trend reports. What's been going on for the last 6 months? What's been going on for the last 12 months? Are we still heading the direction that we planned on? We set this goal to be in this position by this date. How close are we? Are we still on track? And having that information being brought to you regularly helps you to monitor and ensure that the direction of the agency is still moving where we want it to go. Risk management, we talked briefly before internal controls. what controls are there in terms of safeguarding the financials? You know, it is the responsibility of a board to hire and procure an auditor and then to actually listen to those auditor findings and read that report and understand it and ask the questions to know that the work is and the money is being accounted for. This is public money, and we are entrusted with that. We want to make sure that we're meeting that demand and meeting that responsibility. Safeguarding of assets. You know, if you haven't already, I would really encourage you to actually become familiar with the properties and know what they look like and know what they what an apartment looks like at Charles Young or at Pete Dresson or at Opal Point, and just know what that feels like, because then it helps you to understand then when there's an ask for a large sum of money for some type of revitalization, is this really needed or not needed, or why it's needed. The better and more familiar you are with that, the easier it is for you to be able to play that role of safeguarding the assets. And another element to that is recognizing the various inspections that will take place. Again, with the properties we have, both HUD and USDA will be doing various inspections of the property. How are the properties scoring? What does it look like? Are we presenting safe, decent, affordable housing to our community and to our residents? And then finally, program compliance. As I mentioned, it gets a little bit complex having multiple programs. But are we meeting those demands? And HUD will let you know. The one program has management occupancy reviews, which someone comes out and actually looks at how the property is running from HUD's perspective in areas of compliance. The various field offices, the public housing property reports to the San Antonio field office. The multifamily property reports to Fort Worth or all to Southwest Housing. Either way, there's information, there's data there that's important for you to hear, to know that we're still meeting those compliance requirements of the agency. And finally, the last section I want to talk about just is the legal and ethical responsibility. There's the fiduciary responsibility to act in good faith and to uphold the integrity of the agency. The legal responsibility to ensure that we're operating in the best interest of the public and use of the money that we've been entrusted with. And the ethical responsibility to care about that, to care that we are, care for the agency more so than personal and special interests. And related to that, obviously here we'll be in alignment, working together with our city, working together with various other partners, but always keeping in mind that your specific role is to make sure that you are within that conversation looking out for the best interest of the Housing Authority, to make sure that while we want to work and we work in partnership with many, many entities as housing authorities, we do have a responsibility to make sure that our agency is still staying strong for the health, safety, and well-being of the residents and families that we serve. This is a high-level overview, went through very quickly, but I'll be open to some discussion or any comments that you might have.
If we have questions as they pop up, are you available for questions?
I will, yes, I will
Okay.
be. I intend to be here for the balance of the meeting because I think there's going to be an item that I may have some input on towards the end of the
Okay,
meeting.
because I have some things queuing up in my brain, but I don't know if I have any legit questions right now.
If I might interject, so we had asked Mr. Roth to go through a high-level overview. Included in the backup for this meeting are a couple of relevant chapters out of a book that is literally written to help you understand how to better be, or how you're supposed to operate a housing authority. So that's part of the backup that you received on the meeting notice that Ms. Guerra sent to you guys. So I would encourage you to spend some time with that material. Mr. Roth is going to be with us as we go through our transition to a permanent full-time executive director and management structure. But until then, he is here to help us and to better understand what we're all doing on behalf of the Kyle Housing Authority. So if you have questions for him, you can always feel free to email those to me directly so we can kind of prep. And then moving forward on future meetings, there will always be some general discussion time that will be posted to help understand and talk about roles and responsibilities and things of that nature. I don't know what that's going to look like yet, but I'll find some language to throw into the agendas. So we'll have kind of an open forum to be able to have some dialogue around this.
Just out of curiosity, I know with the school board, they have like their own Schoolology or some sort of thing where they can submit questions, and then whoever it pertains to, they respond. Does HACA have something similar to that you know of?
We
Or
don't.
is it just kind of a send an email?
Yeah, it's an email or other forms of communication. But as mentioned, absolutely, we're here to be a help and support to the Kyle Housing Authority and answer questions that we can using the experience that we've had.
Sure. Bless you.
And I would say specifically, send them through me as the executive director, interim executive director, and don't copy each other. We're a new board, and we don't want to violate any kind of open meetings conversations. I know our city attorney, Amy Alcorn Reed, is going to be having some conversation with us about open meetings in general, but we don't want to accidentally do things that we shouldn't. So if you have questions, send them to me. We'll address them in a public space through the meetings, and we'll figure it out together.
Perfect. That was my next question. So great.
Oh, well, very good.
Okay.
I guess, and for anyone wanting to take that ethics course, would we email you or Debbie?
I will get the
or-
information. I think I probably actually already have it in my email from Mike Gerber with the Housing Authority of the City of Austin. And so I will send that out to you guys all individually as a wrap up to this meeting. So you have that and can register for it. And I think it's a great resource. And I'll also include the link to the full materials. What we posted in the backup is just 3 chapters, if I recall. But I'll attach the full book. It's not copywritten. It's publicly available. So we're not infringing on anything there.
And that material comes from an entity called Nan McKay, which is a leading trainer within the public housing and housing industry space.
And I know we had talked about trying to get more familiar with the properties.
Yes.
Are we allowed to go on our own, or do we need to notify ahead of time?
I think it would be helpful to reach out to the on-site property management there, Talicia, to know that so that she knows that you're coming. And in that respect, if you're looking at being at Dressen versus Young, she can meet you at the appropriate place. So I will include in my email her contact information so that you can reach out to her. I also hope to go out there, so I might try to visit and piggyback, provided it's not next week when I'm not here.
Okay. And then for Opal, who is our contact for that?
I don't know the answer to that yet. So
Okay.
right now it's still me, and we'll
Okay.
figure that one out.
And
My
same for
focus
this-
has been over the last week and a half or so, 2 weeks, has been really Charles Young and Pete Dressen,
Okay.
rather than Opal. So
And then Strand is,
Strand and Calterra, the Strand and the Arden at Kohler's Crossing are 2 properties that we terminated the MOUs at the last
Completely
meeting.
terminated.
And so
Okay.
those, and look, Talicia is here. Hello, ma'am. I was just talking about you. So those 2 MOUs have effectively been dissolved. And
Got
so
it.
there is
Okay.
there's no longer any kind of affiliation between Kyle Housing Authority and those 2 developments at this point.
okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
One last question. Do we have an auditor right now, or is that through HACA?
No, we do. There has been. I have communicated with HUD about those kind of requirements. They have been met on a timely basis from the previous management company. I don't have access to those reports yet, or rather, I don't know how to access those reports yet. I think I have access to them through the system, but I have yet to be knowledgeable enough about how to navigate through the 500 HUD systems that I have been added to or will be added to over the next couple of days. So the fiscal year for the Housing Authority is June 1?
No, it's
No, it's July 1 through June 30.
So just ended the fiscal year.
So we'll be working with the auditors and moving forward. But they're, in talking to HUD, both HUD San Antonio and HUD Fort Worth, we are up to date on all of the requirements that we would need to be up to date on for compliance with the programs that we're part of. So that's good news.
Is there any thought about trying to get both of them on the same program?
So there has, in talking with San Antonio HUD, which is over the public housing, they were in very preliminary conversations with the previous management company about repositioning that particular property because that's the Charles Young property because it is public housing and only 21 units. It's a very small property with a lot of requirements associated with the program that it's affiliated with, right? So we actually have a meeting with HUD. I want to say around August 18th to have them share some of the information with me as the interim executive director about what repositioning would look like. And that would probably be something along the lines of moving out of public housing and into something more like what we have with Pete Dressen. But I don't have enough detail on that to speak more than to say we're going to have a conversation with HUD about it. And obviously bring that back and have conversations with the Board of Commissioners.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roth. So the next item that we have on the agenda is, as you guys pointed out, we have 3 properties that we have that are part of the Kyle Housing Authority portfolio. One being Pete Dressen Housing, one being Charles Young, and the other being Opal Point. Opal Point is established under a memorandum of understanding that establishes fundamentally just some baseline income restricted affordable housing, kind of more traditional in its affordable housing structure, income restrictions, not necessarily part of any of the federally mandated or federally governed housing authority type programs. So as we're going to be working with that property, Opal Point, I thought it would be helpful to bring in Housing Works of Austin and specifically of SSR to provide just an overview on what housing affordability looks like in Kyle, what it means. There's a lot of conversation about this locally. And as FS is going through the materials, you'll note we as a city are included in the calculation of the area median income of Austin. And so what's affordable in Austin is a very different conversation than what's affordable in Kyle. And that's what I've asked FS to focus on in our conversations here so that we can really understand the nuance of that, what our affordability needs are in Kyle, and how we as a community can work towards those kind of goals. Housing Works of Austin is also the entity that the city of Kyle, as I turn my hat the other direction, the city of Kyle has hired Housing Works of Austin to help us basically produce a housing plan or a housing strategy that we can discuss with our council and our community, and that's going to be coming forward this fall. And so Avess and his team is very knowledgeable about what's happening in Austin and how it affects Kyle and what's happening in Kyle. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Avess.
Thank you, Mr. Love. Good evening, board members. Thank you all for the opportunity. As Rosie mentioned, we're working on a housing assessment, so you're seeing some of the preliminary data. There's a lot of work that will be coming, but some things that seem pertinent, wanted to just go over that. So again, my name is Avess Azhar. I serve as the Executive Director of Housing Works Austin. And really, we are a 501c3 based out of Austin. We're focused on looking at housing affordability across the entire 5-county region and supporting, affordability through education, research, and advocacy. Just to kick off, one of the things we truly believe in is all kinds of homes in all parts of town for all kinds of people. And right now, this includes in all parts of our region. Really, how do we have housing for all folks and where they need it, and make sure that we're serving folks where they need to be served. just going quickly over the agenda, and then I'll start digging into some of this. So introduction, we just went through it. I'll go over some of the data for Kyle, sort of at a glance, looking at some basic housing metrics, and we'll talk about that. Some positive highlights and concerns that we're picking up from the data. Really looking at defining affordability and MFI, or median family income. We'll talk about that. Going into really digging into what the median family income looks like for the city of Kyle. Who needs housing in the city of Kyle, and then really some nuance on understanding how MFI, or median family income, works, ending with a housing toolkit. I'm about to throw a lot of data at y'all. This is, of course, all available. Please ask me to pause at any point, and again, happy to answer your questions. So again, I think really just starting from the top, this is data coming in from 23, because we're looking at cycles of census data. When you're looking at the city of Kyle at the moment, some things that I really want to start is, one, at the bottom right, you'll see that at least 1/3 of residents in the city of Kyle are renters. Another 2/3 essentially fall within the homeowner category. In the city of Kyle, the cost of living, the average rent per month is essentially around $1,490. This is for an average size unit, and the median home price is around $350,000. The median family income for the city of Kyle itself is $93,000. We'll dig a little bit into what that means. At the top right, you'll also see we have our affordable housing units that exist currently in the city of Kyle. That's coming on to nearly 1,300 units. Please note this does not include the Chloe and Oasis at Plum Creek. We're working through getting more data and expanding that, but this essentially covers a lot of sort of the legacy projects that exist, including some 9% tax credit, low-income housing tax credit projects as well. And then, of course, we have demographics as well, with one thing that's just worth mentioning, that there is a significant population, at least 7.4% folks who are higher than the age of 65. So when we're looking at affordable housing needs, talking about senior needs for housing as well. Other things that are worth mentioning for the city of Kyle itself, we have nearly 3,500 folks who are individuals who are living below poverty. The worker side is really critical. This is data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I'll be honest, it's a little jarring. So nearly 1,000 folks, residents in the city of Kyle, live and work in the city of Kyle. So this is workers only. Over 6,000 work in Kyle, but they live outside the city of Kyle. And then a whopping more than 21,000 folks live in the city of Kyle, but go outside of the city to work, right? So there's something in the housing world we call the jobs housing balance, where we want to make sure that employment and jobs are closely located with housing to make sure that workers are being served both for housing and employment needs. At the bottom, you'll see cost burden, and I'll talk a little bit about what that is. So cost burden is a very commonly used metric in the housing world for households or families that are spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs are considered cost burdened. And if they spend more than 50% of their costs on housing, they're considered extremely cost burdened. And this is a good indicator of sort of where folks are in terms of what their housing costs look like based on their income itself. And you'll notice that for the city of Kyle, more than 1/3 of folks are paying more than 30% of their income towards housing, which again, by federal standards and national standards of affordability, is not what we want to see. Worse still, it's the highest cost burden as compared to Hays County, the entire 5-county metropolitan statistical area, or MSA, and the state of Texas. Similarly, 15% of households in the city of Kyle are paying more than 50% of their income on housing costs. And really what that means is that at that point, other household needs such as childcare, personal care, health care, education, employment, all of those start falling off because folks are having to really divert a lot of household resources toward housing. So just, bringing in that snapshot. On the highlight side, this number I just noticed on the slide, this should be 1,297 as we had. So there is a decent amount of affordable housing, talking about sort of like how do we match it to where the need is, and we'll talk about that in a second as well. And then compared to the major cities, Kyle is still relatively affordable. So looking at Austin, Georgetown, Round Rock, other cities, it is relatively more affordable with that median home price of $350,000 and the rent around $1,500. Concerns. So the first one is really that when you look at it, the really great share of folks in the city of Kyle are cost burdened, or they're paying more than they rightfully should for their housing costs, and that does impact their ability to, figure out other expenses that are necessary for a household. The second point is a flip. You'll see it from the previous slide, which is compared to other cities, Kyle is relatively affordable, and that's something that will kick in when we talk a little further. That we have federal guidelines that we follow for defining what affordability means, but because Kyle is relatively affordable to the region or for those numbers, there's a little bit of a mismatch there, and we'll dig into that in a little more detail. And then the last one again is that when you're looking at it, more than 95% of the labor force that is living in the city of Kyle is employed outside of the city, so there's a little bit of a mismatch there. Two quick things before we jump into it, because I'm going to throw out a lot of this, right? So one is defining affordable housing by the fact that it's based on 30% of a household's pre-tax income. And so it's tied to median family income for that purpose. And median family income, and you'll hear multiple versions of their MFI or AMI, which is your median income, or HMFI, it's all sorts of things. Largely, they are apart from some nuance in the data, they are largely interchangeable, or at least locally are used in an interchangeable way. Within that 5-county metropolitan statistical area, MSA, the Housing and Urban Development Department of the United States government defines income limits, and that is how it's defined. Those are based on median family income. We'll dig a little bit more into that, and that's how affordability is often being defined. Again, a lot of data. Bear with me.
Before you start, can I ask a question
yes,
on the
please.
The last slide before
Yes.
this one? So considering that the large percentage of Kyle's labor force lives outside the city, it says 95.4% in 2021, and only 14.3% of those working in Kyle also live in the city. So how can the Housing Authority actively contribute to attracting and retaining the workforce within Kyle through affordable housing initiatives?
So as I mentioned, sort of the housing world, one of the things that's often talked about as best practices, housing jobs balance, which is trying to see if you, and there's ability to dig out that data, which is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You look at sort of what are the median incomes or average incomes for folks, and then you try to see whether housing matches them. And there's a diagram that you're going to see in a bit. We'll talk a little bit about various employment sectors, where they fall on that MFI chart and how many households fit within it. And of course, this is, it's much harder work to do than to just say that we need to have better jobs housing balance. And of course, y'all are going to be looking at that as you proceed and looking at the various things. But part of that is really making sure that the affordable housing that the Housing Authority is producing or incentivizing is really tied to where need is in the community and what sort of income levels really need to be served. And again, there's going to be a chart where you'll get to see that much, much more clearly.
Thank you.
And then if I might also add, part of what the city of Kyle will work on is kind of the companion piece, which is the concept of bringing more employment sectors to Kyle so that we have more opportunities, more jobs, right?
Thank you, Mr. Love. So on this is what HUD shares. So this is for the 2025, our area's median income, and that's at 100%, if you think about it, is over $133,000. I really want you all to think in your head for a second, how many folks or households do you know that actually make that or make more, right? It's pretty high. And you'll see at the bottom that this is defined based on our metropolitan statistical area, which includes Austin, Round Rock, San Marcos, and includes Bastrop, Caldwell, Hayes, Travis, and Williamson County. So it's the full 5 counties with major cities. So part of it is looking at that median family income and averaging it out essentially across the entire region. Often what we will use in the housing world as sort of the back of the hand math is that column for 4, because of course it varies by family size. So 4 is sort of generally considered that family size. And if you look at it, if we were to provide, based on this limit, that is for 2025, if somebody was serving, let's say at 80% median family income, the household would be eligible for a household that's making more than $100,000 a year. So that's what that would look like. And then you can sort of see what that looks like. Very low income is 50%, and then extremely low income, it used to be 30%. It's a data anomaly, but it's very close to that 30% that you'll see. this diagram essentially shows, and this is data from last year, so it's a little bit of a mismatch, but we're trying to sort of match it all out. But you'll see that at the top, it is the median family income, sort of those levels. You'll see the percentages. So extreme left side of the diagram is below 30% median family income, and then extreme right is above 80%, in between 80 and 120% median family income. So essentially, you have categories of extremely low income households, very low income, and moderate income households. We'll just focus on, for now, let's just look at the extremely low income. So these are folks who are below 30% median family income, which again, for the city of Kyle, per the HUD guideline, comes to $40,000. And the households that fit within this are actually over 3,300 households would be within this. Historically, in our region as a whole, we saw that most of the folks who used to be in this category were senior, persons with disabilities, folks on fixed incomes. Increasingly, we're seeing food service workers, retail workers, childcare workers, and other folks fall within this category. So you'll see that those are the folks who fall within that 30% median family income and lower. And this is matching HUD data with census data and, again, Bureau of Labor Statistics data. So we have occupational data to look at that. The other category is that very low income, that's 30% to 60% median family income. So if you look at the low income housing tax credit program, which of course is the largest producer of affordable housing in the state of Texas, it's that at that 60% median family income and lower. So that's 80,000 and lower. Again, if you think about it, that's a regional number, and there's 4,000 households that fall within this, and this includes a lot of critical, honestly, workers, including paramedics, firefighters, construction laborers, K-12 teachers, office administrators. A large group of folks fall within this. And so then when we go above this to 60 and 80, in this, again, this is for the city of Kyle specifically, some police officers in Sheriff's Patrol, some technologists and others will fall within that category. And again, you can sort of see. So really, what we're talking about is folks with the highest need are on the left side of this diagram, and folks who may have a need, particularly in home ownership, but not necessarily in rental housing, are on the right side. And of course, there's market rate above this as well. One thing I wanted to bring in is just that comparison, right? So you look at that chart, and of course, we are required in a lot of programs to follow the HUD guidelines on income, but they become really challenging when you're looking at local data. So let's just look at the top row here. Starting from the left, you'll see that is the HUD MSA value, which is 122,000, because I was trying to match 23 is the only census data that I have. We're looking at 23 HUD numbers as well, just to make sure we're doing an apples to apples comparison. All that said, you'll see there's a significant amount, over $33,000 difference between median family income in the city of Kyle and in the MSA as a whole. And then you can see, just for comparison reasons, we have Hays County, San Marcos, Austin, Buda, just so you can sort of see the categorization that occurs there. And you can see it really varies, and it does not perfectly align with what the 5-county MSA value is. When you start looking at that green column for the city of Kyle, for that 30%, 50%, 80%, we're now sort of talking about very different numbers from what would be calculated per that first column, which is the HUD MSA. So if you look at it, let's just look at 80% median family income. If a project is done at the 80% median family income for rental, we're serving households that make over $93,000. However, when you compare it to the city of Kyle itself and its residents and their income, really 80% is at $71,000. And so not perfect math, but essentially if you took the HUD MSA requirements and did it at 60% median family income, that actually matches Kyle's 80% median family income. So let me just explain that in a second. What that would mean is for units that are being provided at essentially 60% per the guidelines that we have from HUD that are best practice and what is followed, that even then at 60% is serving households at that 80% level, sort of based on that. And of course, this is a little more variable than that. These numbers are not absolute, but you can at least see the trends and how they match for the various things. I'm going to jump into, this is where it gets a little more data wonky, but there's a few key themes that will come out of this. One just being, the most clear one is that yes, median family income, even for the city of Kyle, is lower. it becomes even more variable when we're looking at different kinds of income. The biggest difference is between family and non-family households. So if you look at the bottom two rows, generally speaking, the HUD guidelines are based on family income. When you look at non-family household income, just median in the city of Kyle, it's actually 60,000. So if you think about non-family households, it's even lower. This could be roommates, this could be individuals, this can be multiple folks, they would fall within this category. Similarly, you'll see there's a big distinction between the median family income for owner-occupied units and then also for renter-occupied units. So again, it's much, much more variable than what that one number for the 5-county MSA looks like. Again, lots of numbers. Key thing being that as you look to it, you'll see it becomes even more difficult to assess that MFI and just looking at income in general when we're looking at race, ethnicity, and other factors as well. So in general, you'll see that for households that are white alone, that are not considered Hispanic or Latino, or do not identify that way, their median income actually falls within 95,000. But for Hispanic or Latino householders, that goes down to 87. So you'll sort of see that distinction rising throughout the various categories, both for ethnicity and race. So this takes us honestly kind of back to this diagram, which is the question of like, how do we serve folks and where the need is most in the community? And so again, from the sort of best practices, housing affordability perspective, really looking at folks with the greatest needs means that we're filling those gaps. And particularly when you're looking at, essentially regional MFI limits to define affordability, it's in some ways, easier to go to those lower MFI levels to serve folks. One thing I'll just say, it comes up because folks often ask this question, which is, well, why can't we use a different MFI level? If we know what the one is for the city, why can't we use that? There's HUD programs required in a certain way that cannot be changed. That's one concern. So there's federal requirements that we have to follow as communities. The other one is folks will often then say, well, why can't we have it different by census tract or zip code, or can it be different across a geography? And that's actually a fair housing violation, right? We can't have different affordability levels in different parts of town. We want to make sure that they're matching. So in that way, really what remains, one of the best ways to address it is to target to those lower MFIs. Like I said, if you're, and this is just like, the math that I'm doing standing up here, it's a lot more nuanced than that. But if you are serving folks at 60% median family income and lower, you're actually already able to capture those folks in the city of Kyle who are at 80% median family income. So if you want to serve them, that mismatch creates a little bit of a challenge here. A few things, and I'll close out and open to questions. I do want to, of course, acknowledge with you all that, looking at household affordability, it's a spectrum of needs. This is by no means saying that the right side here, which is, market rate, rental, home ownership, community land trust, there is a need for those ownership programs in the community as well, and by no means denying that, and that those are often in higher MFI levels. But we also know that really the greatest need, particularly in the rental market, remains on that left side of the spectrum, where a lot of these programs, including public housing and housing choice vouchers, fit in. So likely in that sort of category. And then the last thing, this is just from a housing works perspective, things we believe in, right? I also want to acknowledge that, yes, we're talking about expanding income-restricted affordable housing through the Housing Authority, which is, of course, a great asset to the community. There's multiple aspects looking at affordability, everything from making sure that we're building more housing, we're investing in housing as the Housing Authority would be, preserving existing housing as well, making sure we're able to leverage our dollars. So, how do we have local dollars or local resources, including those that we're getting from the federal or state government? How do we leverage them with other dollars to make sure we can stretch them further? Part of that, of course, is partnering with nonprofit, private sector, philanthropic sectors. We want to have, of course, part of it is looking at creating inclusive communities. So yes, we're creating new affordable housing, but how do we also keep folks in their communities today? How do we ensure that folks are there? And then the last is sort of a plus, which frankly goes to something Mr. Ulab was saying earlier with the economic development piece. All I've talked about today is really housing affordability, but we understand childcare costs, healthcare costs, mobility costs, employment, all of those things impact household affordability as well. And I'll stop there and see if folks have other questions or comments or anything else y'all might be curious about. And anything else staff would like to add?
Are we able to get a copy of this or email?
It's posted in the backup.
Okay,
And so
perfect.
if you look at the meeting notice that should be on your calendars that were sent to your emails from Ms. Guerra, there's a link, there's an agenda, and then each of the items is listed, and you can just link to the backup.
Perfect, thank you.
And as Mr. Love was mentioning, if y'all have questions, you can direct them to staff or connect us. We're happy to,
Yep.
answer questions or dig into specific items as well.
And I was just going to say, as Yves mentioned, he is helping the city with Housing Works, and kind of Development Services is taking that on. So sadly, or good thing, this will not be the last you see of Yves and kind of Housing Works. So we are kind of at the forefront of getting that information together. We actually plan to kind of showcase some of these statistics and refine to council, but we absolutely are going to be coming back, if welcome to this board, to kind of share some of those results and continue to collaborate on that.
Okay, great. With all the data that you were sharing, I noticed Buda has a higher MFI than Austin, which is
Interesting.
Interesting. Does Buda have any sort of housing program as well? Do we know?
I don't believe they do.
Okay.
They have some tax credit housing, but I don't think honestly, I think Kyle is maybe served as kind of the housing authority or the housing board primarily for Hayes County. I think San Marcos does too, but for kind of the Buda Kyle area, I think Kyle has
Okay.
that.
Do the other cities mention like Round Rock and I think
Many cities do
Georgetown?
have housing
Oh, yes.
authorities,
As
so,
well. Okay.
like Georgetown has it when I was there. I think some of your smaller cities technically don't. Like, I don't know if like the city of Lakeway has a housing
Sure.
authority, or for sure like Westlake wouldn't, and like Bee Cave doesn't probably either, a true kind of housing authority. Usually they're kind of older, established setup cities that
Sure.
really kind of have some of that.
In counties, we'll have housing authorities as well, and I'll just add to that pretty much exactly what staff said, with the other caveat being that often it also depends. Some actually have properties that are sort of like, public housing, and those exist today. Some are just doing vouchers, some are just doing new partnerships. So it's also a little bit of a gamut on what kind of programs and housing exist across the entire region. And I will say for the Buda thing, it is curious. I would love to dig into that data more. I think the understanding would be we do have a lot of communities in the region that have considerably actually even higher income than the city of Austin. Like we face in the city of Austin, we have the exact same problem, which is we have pretty affluent communities where folks are doing well, but what that does do it is skews the data in terms of income when we're looking at the region.
And that's what I was wondering with if people are coming to the areas that have the more affordable housing and that skews the data versus like Buda may have drawn more affluent families and that's why the data is trending that way. So
And it's probably a little bit of both. I know in Austin, when you look at the MFI levels over time, you've seen some really significant jumps. And it's not necessarily because incomes have risen so much in Austin. It's because people cannot afford to live there anymore. And so they've had to find housing elsewhere. In a lot of the surrounding communities, they're still traveling into Austin. And so they're kind of trading that housing expense for the transportation expense. And it's still creating imbalance for them and their households.
yeah, absolutely.
I'm sorry, quick things that I'll add to that is also to say, because geographically the city of Austin is so big, there's a lot of variation across the city. So
Sure.
different neighborhoods just really have very different MFI. And so as I said, we're facing that sort of problem as well. And then the other piece of it that I will add into that is that one of the challenges that we're seeing sort of across the region is, again, there's federal and HUD requirements, and we want to have standardized programs, but then it's sometimes hard to assess where the localized needs would be. So like you heard from staff, we're working with the city of Kyle, very excited to be working with them and looking at a housing assessment. And this is really the preliminary quantitative. There's going to be a lot more quantitative data. And then one of the things we want to do is really interview local stakeholders and go out in the community, because we also understand there's some things that are just not going to be captured in the data. So I just want to acknowledge that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you happen to know with Daisy Lane Apartments? I know that one has like income restricted, I believe. Does that fall under Buda or Kyle? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do think that is the city of Kyle's
It is,
project
okay.
on that. One of them was also potentially considered, I think, for a partnership with the Housing Authority too. But we'll make sure that we update all of current agreements through the LIHTC and different kind of affordable housing programs that we have and make sure that's included in some of the data for sure.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, Julie.
Well, I was just gonna say, naturally, the data is skewed with Buda not having public housing, right? So that's apples to oranges, looking at the income level there, right? Just naturally.
There's also a significant population difference between Kyle and Buda. And keep in mind, we're only 51 units in our public housing or our housing authority properties. So 51 units, but I think what's the population of Buda right now, Melissa?
Oh gosh, it's like 20.
Like 20-ish, and Kyle is
65.
around 65 to 70-ish.
Ownership and rental will make a really big difference as well. So if there's more renters, as we saw in the charts, your median family income will decrease. And the other one, as part of that, is actually also tied to just multifamily. So cities in general that have more multifamily or more rental stock will have more affordability. So some cities in our region have historically really not built any multifamily or housing for renters, so their workers have been living in neighboring cities. So again, when you're looking at their median family income will look higher, but their workers are likely not living in the same place.
How are you tracking, are the stats for renters, is that coming from like not publicly owned, but like apartment complexes? Or is this all, like, in my neighborhood, we have a whole swath of rental houses. How are we collecting that data?
So the data that we have is largely from the Census Bureau, Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the Housing and Urban Development Department. So most of that is being collected as part of the census. So at the decennial census, everybody is being counted individually based on their household forms. I'm sorry, this is a geeky stuff. Y'all are getting me excited, which is like the short form of the census that goes out in the decennial census every 10 years. But then based on that, there's statistical analysis done to provide sample data for the intervening years. So for example, the data that we're looking at for 2023, which is the latest available statistical data, is the Census Bureau does those calculations based on essentially the margin of error.
I do have one last question, I think, last. So what collaborations with community-based agencies are currently being explored or can be initiated to expand the affordable housing opportunities, the affordable housing?
I'll speak from our perspective, and then I'll really hand it over to staff. From our perspective, from Housing Works, I'll say two things. One, the research, we're hoping to actually analyze that, right? Like I said, that qualitative data, we're going to be reaching out to community partners, city partners, other partners in the city, trying to figure that out from folks. The other thing, I'll just be honest, as Housing Works, I would be very cautious in saying, I think you all know your community way better than I'll ever know. And so we want to make sure that we're following your leadership. But part of that is from our end, assessing what those partnerships look like and making sure that y'all have that information available. And I'm sure staff, if y'all wanted to add something.
Yeah. Yes, and I think building off of that, this city had a kind of a pilot program for property improvement, a home repair program this year, which we partnered with Austin Habitat for Humanity to help us out with that. They have some data. Hayes County has done some partnership opportunities, I think, with Austin Habitat before as well. The city is a brand new CDBG, Community Development Block Grant Entitlement City through HUD just this year. So we're working on really identifying and collaborating with some of those partners to utilize those monies in allocated areas and kind of continuing to build on those partnerships. And we're hoping with this strategy with Housing Works to really kind of take it to the next level for that too.
And then I would say the Housing Authority is a critical partner in those efforts, being the primary identified entity to really work with the deeply affordable homeowners or residents that are here in Kyle. So it's part of what we're trying to build, and part of the reason why I think the mayor took some of the actions that were taken recently to rebuild the board on the Housing Authority to get some good deep alignment between what's happening at the city and what we're looking to see achieved through the Housing Authority.
and I think it's already been mentioned by staff, but housing authorities have tools that are sort of unique and you can really leverage from that perspective on providing deeper affordability on their affordability. On the partnership side, I do want to honestly acknowledge the Housing Authority of the City of Austin has done a really good job of not just partnering to provide the affordable housing, but also partnering with girls and boys clubs and Meals on Wheels and others to also provide services, all sorts of support that households need. And that's everything from programming for seniors and children to everything in between. That's also a part of it. Of course, that requires resources and is challenge, but can be part of that long-term strategy to build out partnerships.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yves. The next item on the agenda is going to be a briefing on open meetings issues from a little refresher from City Attorney Amy Alcorn-Reed.
I'm going to say good afternoon because it's not quite 5. Amy Alcorn-Reed, City Attorney for the City of Kyle, for the record. We talked about this a little bit last meeting, but under Chapter 392, the City Attorney is authorized to provide advice and representation to the Housing Authority as long as our interests are aligned, which we believe they are at the moment. So today I'm going to talk about open meetings. I think if you have not served on a board very often or you don't do this every day, open meetings can be really confusing. And so I like to give refreshers to boards regularly. The general rule of a meeting is that every regular, special, or called meeting has to be open to the public unless it's allowed to be closed under the Act. The Act applies whenever our governmental body, like we have a governmental body and the body's meeting. Housing authorities are subject to the Open Meetings Act, at least according to the Attorney General's office. And the Attorney General's office made that decision about 30 years ago, so I feel like most housing authorities at this point understand that they are to follow the Act. A meeting is any gathering of a quorum of the body where they discuss public business. So this gets a lot of questions. What's a meeting? Can we text each other? Can we email each other? Can we socialize? And the answer is basically, mostly you cannot text each other, email beyond around a quorum of the board. You can be at a social function as long as you're not taking any formal action and any discussion of the public business is merely incidental to organized events. As a best practice, I usually recommend that you not just gather together at a social function and chat, because it kind of looks bad and that's going to lead to questions. Some examples of meetings are a quorum, the regular meeting, that's what this is. We just talked about social functions. If you go to a city council meeting and all 3 of you are there and you're talking about board business, that qualifies as a meeting that needed to be posted. If you try to meet with city staff, again, we can't meet with all 3 of you at the same time unless it's in an open meeting. And then, of course, electronic communications, and this one has gotten cities and other government entities in trouble, either through group text, through Facebook, through some sort of message board. It's just best to not do it. I even usually recommend that people on my boards not be Facebook friends, just to avoid the potential accidentally commenting on each other's posts about housing. Currently, notice must be posted 72 hours before the meeting. That changes on September 1st. So as of September 1st, all notice will be posted 3 business days prior to the meeting. You will start getting your materials earlier. We're going to ask if you want anything put on agenda. You're going to have to tell us earlier so that we can get that done. Meetings must be located in Texas. We cannot meet outside of Texas, even though it might be fun. They have to be accessible to the public, including persons with disability. Fortunately, you meet in this room. It is accessible, so you're covered. The public has to be given a chance to speak on matters on the agenda. That's all that's required under the law. We don't have to let them talk about other things. We generally do allow them to talk about any kind of housing authority business. You can't vote by secret ballot, written ballot. You can't vote in the back room. You have to vote out here every time. And you can't vote by circulated letter or by email or any of those things. We bring these up because there are criminal violations for violating the Open Meetings Act. The biggest ones are participating in a closed meeting without the authorized exception. I will tell you, as long as I'm preparing your agendas, we will not post an exception unless it's authorized under the Open Meetings Act. We will include on there an opinion from myself that it does comply with the Open Meetings Act. You also have to ensure that you don't participate in a closed meeting where there's no certified agenda or meetings being prepared. I prepared a certified agenda for our last meeting. We will be preparing them for you anytime we have an executive session. We also cannot disclose what's in the certified agenda of an executive session. And the biggest one is the walking quorum, and this is the one that most often gets violated and causes the most confusion. So a walking quorum is basically a group of meetings during which there's never a quorum participating, but at the end of the day, we've had a quorum. So say I call Ms. Garza and I say, hey, Ms. Garza, here's this issue going on with the Housing Authority. And she says, great. And then she calls Ms. Armstrong and they discuss it. Then Ms. Armstrong calls Ms. Orgish. And at the end of the day, all three of you have been part of these meetings. You've all discussed what each other believe. And that could potentially be a criminal violation for a walking quorum. Anyone who knowingly participates in those meetings understands that all three of you are being involved in those meetings, could potentially be subject to criminal violations. Highly recommend that we don't do that. And then all deliberations have to occur in open meetings, between a quorum have to occur in open meetings. Deliberation is one of those things that is pretty all-encompassing. It's any kind of verbal exchange. That includes written as well as spoken exchanges. So emails, you'll notice that when city staff emails you, we will blind copy all the board members so that you don't accidentally hit reply all, because that's one of those things that is easy to do. And then best practices, because I always err on the side of caution, which I put at the bottom here. It's just best to not talk about board business outside of this room as much as you can. Make sure you're not CCing the entire board on anything or discussing public business on Facebook with each other. That could all be problematic. And then there are probably some specific questions about open meetings. This is very general, so if you have any specific questions, please let me know.
Just double checking, like if, for example, Julie was not at the meeting last week with the residents, am I able to share anything from that meeting with her? How would that work?
As long as you are not including Ms. Garza in that conversation, that is not a quorum of the board. This board does technically have 5 positions, so a quorum is 3. We just have 2 vacancies right now.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Alternatively, you could suggest that Ms. Orgish call city staff, and we will happily update her on everything going on.
I think I'm good.
Okay, anything else? Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, look at number 5, receiving a report, hold a discussion, provide staff direction regarding the bylaws.
So we're Rosie Trulove, interim executive director. I figure it's easier for me to do this up here than it is over at the table. So what I thought would be helpful is, since again, we're a new board, that we would just spend a little bit of time walking through our bylaws. It's a very short 3-page document. I feel like there are some things that are missing from here, but I want you to be aware of the materials that what it covers, and we can start to create a running list for things that we might want to update. I would say to the fellow city staff and friends from the Housing Authority, if you're hearing things or seeing things that you think we should also have in here, to please let me know. This certainly is not something that we're going to create in a vacuum. The first section, the first article is just the authority of the Housing Authority. 417 West 2nd Street is the mailing address. That is where mail goes to. So if you see any documentation that exists that still lists a post office box, that post office box is no longer in place, and mail is received here at the 417 West 2nd Street address. Officers that are part of Article 2 covers the officers. We actually did this at our last meeting, so congratulations to us. We have a chair, we have a vice chair. Technically, I am the secretary as the interim executive director. This states that the chairperson will at each meeting, the chairperson shall submit recommendations and information that she may consider proper concerning business affairs and policies of the authority. Actions of the chairperson shall at all times be in compliance with all applicable laws. That seems fairly straightforward. The vice chair performs the duty of the chairperson should the chairperson not be available. It is important to note that because we are a 5-member board and we only have 3 appointed members, we do need everyone at all of our meetings to be able to officially conduct our business. Secretary being the executive director, president, and CEO of the authority, having general supervision over administration of business affairs, subject to the direction of you, the Board of Commissioners. It's my responsibility to keep records, act as secretary at the meetings, recording votes, keeping record of proceedings. I have assistance with that in the name of my friend Debbie Guerra over there. Thank you, Debbie Guerra, for being here. I'm officially the signatory of things such as orders and checks for payment and disbursements at the direction of the Board of Commissioners, and that all checks shall be countersigned as duly authorized by resolution to so act. I think what this is saying is that I'm not doing things outside of what you guys have already directed us to or directed me to do. It is my responsibility to implement procedures that are necessary to carry out and enhance board policies and be charged with management of developments of the authority and act in accordance with applicable state and federal laws. Darn. I have the care and custody of all funds of the authority, deposit the same in the name of the authority in such banks or banks as the authority may select. Our current bank is Broadway. I will be getting access to that in the next day or so. We have identified, I've worked with the previous property manager on that, and so we're making progress there. Keeping regular books and accounts. We do have, as we talked about earlier, we do have an auditor that has been performing those responsibilities and turning in the appropriate documentation to the federal government. So we're not seeing anything as being in any shape, form, or fashion inappropriate with that kind of compliance with the federal government. I have the ability to hire additional personnel. I will say that right now, instead of having outside counsel, we are using the Kyle City Attorney, Amy Alcorn Reed, as our legal advisor for all things. We have had conversations that unless or until our interests don't align, then she can continue to act in that capacity. So we're fortunate in that respect. Officers of the authority shall perform duties and functions from time to time as required by the authority and the bylaws. The Board of Commissioners, by resolution from time to time, shall designate a depository or banks for the funds of the authority, which we've already done, and fix the amount of surety and fidelity bonds covering all employees of the authority. Election or appointment, Section 8. The chair and vice chair shall be selected for a one-year term at our annual meeting, which happened at the last meeting. Should the offices of chair and vice chair become vacant, we will act accordingly. The last section here talks about meetings, talks about our annual meeting being the third Tuesday of July, which we actually had that on the third Thursday of July. I think we will want to, when we get to a point of amending these, we will want to talk about the day and time that we say are our regular meetings, because this speaks to Tuesdays at 7 o'clock, which flat conflict with the city council. So and Pansy. Well, the third Tuesday is going to be council. So we'll probably be looking at selecting a different day, but we do have some designated days that are here. Talks about special meetings. We talked about the idea of the quorum. What I don't see in here is any reference to operating procedures or a procurement policy or things of that nature. I feel like that's something that we need to establish for the organization. This is the only document that I've been able to find to govern how the authority operates. So there will have to be some changes to this or some supplemental policies that get developed. The procurement policy is one, or purchasing policy is one that I know off the top of my head I feel like is lacking in this. But I wanted to just spend a few minutes with you guys to see what kind of questions you might have or things that you're maybe are churning in the back of your head that we can work to try to get answers on. I don't know that I'll necessarily have all the answers today, but I certainly want to start trying to establish a good set of operational policies and procedures for the board.
Just out of curiosity, Why do you not count in the quorum?
Because I am not a voting member.
Gotcha, thanks.
Yeah, I'm not. You would see with housing authorities that there would be like a resident council, and that there would potentially be a member of the resident council that sits as a voting member of the Board of Commissioners. There is no resident council for the Kyle Housing Authority, so that is something that I think as we move forward over the next coming weeks, that's something we might want to try to establish or learn more about why there isn't one, so that we can, really work to engage with the residents of the two properties for sure.
My biggest concern was the agreements being made, like the MOUs we just terminated. Like, is there a process for that? What is the process? Do we negotiate? Like, I'm curious how the developers present their proposal to us, and how are we supposed to analyze it? Like, is there a baseline?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I can tell you what I saw from reviewing the previous board actions over the last, bit of time that exist in the public space. The executive director at the time brought those agreements forward, and the developer pitched them to the board, and the board gave a blessing for those to move forward. The MOUs that I have seen are consistently written, so that tells me that there was some, and I feel like I have found one agreement with a specific consultant that was charged with going out and finding these development deals, which I will be making a recommendation that we terminate that partnership or that consulting agreement. I don't know that we have a strong basis for, at least in our procedures, for how we would consider those and evaluate those. At least not that I could find. I think that's a smart thing to do. But I also would recommend, in my capacity as the interim executive director, that we not move forward on anything along those lines until we have the benefit of a housing strategy from our partner with the City of Kyle, and have some good alignment with what are we really trying to achieve as a community.
Well, that was my thought too, I'm assuming there's a tax law of some sort that allowed the MOU that we got, that allowed them to be tax-free if they had the affordable housing, right?
Yeah, so it was a legal action for the housing authority to take. I think both of us and Mr. Roth were talking about as a housing authority, you do have some abilities to do things, and one of them is to grant these property tax exemptions for certain outcomes. And so it was a legal thing to have happen. There was no question about that, but it was not, because it was done really from my perspective in a vacuum and not in consultation with the city or the county, we weren't seeing the kind of affordability levels negotiated into those deals that made them appealing enough to carry forward, right? And so that's the kind of thing that we would want to be looking at, is what is the community benefit that we're getting in exchange for the loss of the property tax revenue. And that's not something that we really have our arms around. I mean, I would say even until we have our housing strategy in place that's worked through and adopted by the City Council of Kyle, I don't feel like we have that really for our community yet. But that's how I would look at those deals, is what kind of community benefit is coming forward, and you have to weigh it. And it's not, when you're talking about a property tax exemption that's going to go much further into the future, I mean, potentially 30, 40, 50 years even, that's hard those are hard conversations to have. So you really want to make sure that you're having that benefit to our larger Kyle community.
I don't know if this would go to you or Amy or both, but is there I don't see anything in here about our connection to the housing properties. Is there any sort of law with us being employed at them or working with the different properties that are on housing, like the executive director was?
So I think for the three properties, I mean, I would think there would be a conflict of interest. that would preclude you from being able to both be employed by one of the properties and serving as a commissioner on the board for the Housing Authority. That feels pretty straightforward. I feel like I'm standing on solid legal ground when I'm not an attorney.
Yeah, I would guess that because we approved the contract with the management entity, that you as a board member are able to make, or commissioner are able to make that vote, that it would be inappropriate for you to then work for that management company.
Well, I guess I'm mostly curious about how the executive director was able to also have the properties under housing.
The executive director was the contractor to manage, and so the executive director is again not a member of the board, doesn't vote on board issues. He was hired to do both, to be the executive director for the authority and to manage the properties.
Yes.
I do think that's a fairly standard practice when you have a contract executive director versus a full-time staff, which I don't know that we have the capacity to handle at this time, but might in the future.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we probably don't have, but that we would envision in the future is some kind of personnel policy that states that. But that would probably come along with how we go about bringing in a new executive director and or property management entity, whether that's the same entity or we hire an executive director and contract with, or some, combination of that.
Okay. And then another question about maybe open meetings as well. Is there any way that we're able to do some sort of like workshopping with the city of Kyle as we move forward, especially with the affordable housing and stuff like that? Or does that fall into, we would have to have an open meeting and announce it and all of the things?
We would post a meeting of both entities if that's what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
We've done it with the Planning Commission in the past, and so we
Okay.
would post the Housing Authority and the City Council will be present, and then they would run it. Usually the mayor would run that meeting, and we would allow for interaction and conversation back and forth.
Okay.
But
thanks.
honestly, for me, it would kind of be both. So I've done workshops just with the commissioner or the board to really kind of sit around a table and discuss stuff. But yes, we do post it as an open meeting as well. But I think we could have both combined meetings, to link up with other boards and commissions if that's what you wanted to do, to really workshop that way, or even workshop around a table and kind of make Yves come back and really kind of dig into
Yeah.
some of the meat and potatoes that we're really looking at on some of the housing plans and stuff too. We can have a more dynamic conversation on that as well.
And would that be the same for if we wanted to meet with, say, HACA, like with their board or any other areas? Are we able to do that? Do you know?
I would imagine
a
we
thing?
can look at what that would look like and what the objective of that would be. The Housing Authority Board for the Housing Authority for the City of Austin, they're really going to be focused on Austin issues, and our partnership, the interlocal agreement that we have for HACA to help with the administration, is really kind of them lending some consulting services to a neighboring jurisdiction that is going through transition. So it's not them necessarily acting in their HACA capacity, the Housing Authority of the City of Austin. It's more like their HACA capacity of Housing Authority of the City of Kyle. Can I say that? Because it's all Ks. No, he's looking at me like I'm crazy. But they're not, we can certainly facilitate coordination and conversations, but what we're going to be focusing on here and the work that you guys are going to be doing is really going to be within the boundaries of the City of Kyle.
Okay.
But as Yves mentioned at the beginning of his presentation, what he has shared tonight is just some preliminary data that is coming forward. There will be a much more comprehensive analysis. There'll be recommendations that'll come out of it. And those that kind of input will be brought, or when we get to a point where we're ready. I am speaking for Melissa, and I'm sure she's okay with me saying this. We will be coming to you guys to get your perspective on the kind of strategies and what we're seeing come into more of the final document. So, we asked him, I specifically asked Housing Works to come in today really to just help us with education and understanding what affordable housing is. So it's the first of many conversations that we'll have on that front. So I have noted things like a personnel policy, procurement policies, wanting to have more information about the audits and access to previous audits that have been done. Are there any other things that, from what we've talked about here, at some point we'll get to a point where we're going to update the bylaws, but I don't have a time frame in line with that yet. What I'll probably do is propose that for maybe a September meeting.
Are there specific Texas laws that we should have on there, like our ability to negotiate tax exemption?
I mean, should we reference, what is it, 392 that applies to housing authorities?
Yeah, Texas Local Government Code, Chapter 392 is something we could reference. A lot of times bylaws will have things about, which items need to come before the board and which items can be handled more administratively. They'll have
Okay.
things
Yeah.
particularly about how this entity might want to partner with city council, if they want to, provide updates to city council, or if they want to provide questions to city council, that sort of thing. So those are things you might put in. And as for the law, I don't know that we would quote the law, because then when it changes, you have to change your bylaws, but we might cite to
Okay.
Chapter 392 of the
Well,
Texas
then
Local Government
maybe
Code.
just a separate document, because I would be curious, like, these are the 5 laws we have to follow that are going to be the most common for us making decisions. Would be helpful.
So I think a lot of that will come forward through the training that
Okay.
that we're potentially looking at. So let's look at that more. And then I think if we can all get through both of the branches of training that I'm going to send out over the next couple of weeks, then that might help us to hammer out what other things we need to make sure we're mindful of in our governing documents.
And are we allowed to discuss with city council if we had a question for them while we're up here?
So again, the same Open Meetings Act rules will apply. So if you're talking to one member of city council or just the mayor, yes, you personally can speak to one of them. If you want to present information at city council meetings, that's something that we can look into, maybe set a time when a housing authority representative could come speak at city council meetings, and then you as the representative, most likely the chair, that's usually how it works, would come and speak at the council meeting. We're probably a little early for that right now, because we're still learning where we are.
And I would remind us all that the Housing Authority Board is appointed by the mayor. That is a specific aspect of state law that it's not a appointment and then confirmation by the full council. This is a mayoral appointment. So the mayor is responsible for that. And since we know that our current mayor has announced that he is not going to finish out his term, and we have an election that's been called for the fall, all of you are in good current appointments. And is it a 3-year appointment? Am I remembering that correctly? Is it 2 years?
There's 2 years and they're staggered.
Yeah.
So I'd have to go look at the appointment documents to see which one's even and which one's odd.
But your appointment, based on how you were appointed, runs and through the end of that. So if a new mayor comes in and your term has expired, then the new mayor could reappoint someone in place of you or reappoint you in your seat. But if you're in a 2-year term, you would have to wait until your term is expired, or something would happen that would be cause for removal. Okay? What else?
I was going to say, Debbie can we can forward some of the appointments. They run on even and odd years. It looks like,
I believe I'm 1 year.
yep.
And then we're Ms. Armstrong and Ms. Orgish 2-year terms?
Yeah, July of 27.
Okay. I'm going to write that down.
Does that also stand for the resident on the board? Like how does that work?
For the resident, if we end up with a resident council and then have a resident commissioner, do you recall, Michael, is it the same 2-year appointment?
All of them are 2-year
Appointed by the
appointments.
mayor in a 2-year term. So it would be someone who would agree from the resident council to be appointed by the mayor.
Okay.
And would be appointed for a 2-year term.
Perfect. Do we have any sort of timeline for the executive director hiring process? Not that we don't love you, but
I'm not going to cry. So I am having so yes and no. There's a couple of different routes we can take. One would be to go out and do a solicitation where we would put a scope of work together and put out an advertisement and do that and go through, a 6 to 8 week advertisement process. I don't know that we have to do that. I'm still trying to understand what the requirements are and to understand what's going to be the best for the organization. So I don't have a firm recommendation on that. But I do want to talk at the end of the meeting about when we're going to have our next meeting, and that's something that I want to be able to talk about by the time we have our next meeting, so we can have a plan of action. And I'm thinking that meeting would be somewhere around like the 20th-ish of August, somewhere in that latter part of that week, if that works, 20th or 21st.
Are we all checking our schedules?
I mean, we can talk about that now.
Yeah.
I don't have my phone. Can someone tell me if the 20th or the 21st is a Wednesday or a Thursday?
The 20th is a Wednesday and the 21st is a Thursday.
Yeah. And I think
I'm making Debbie check on room availability.
it was available, Chambers was available for both of those dates when I looked a couple of days ago, but that could have changed.
I'm good both days.
20th would be amazing.
20th would be amazing.
Let me see.
And what time? Did you?
Yeah, the 20th works for me as well.
20th works?
Yeah. Sweet.
Okay.
4 p.m. again, or what time?
Yeah, what time? I mean, we had done
5:30?
4. We could do later.
I would
What-
prefer later. I will be working until 5:30.
Okay, so 6 o'clock on the 20th?
That would be great.
Okay. And I will put together an agenda, but it will likely include another, again, just general discussion item for roles and responsibilities of boards to be able to, board members to ask questions. We'll talk about the executive director search or however I end up phrasing that on terms of for the agenda purposes. Probably a conversation about the bylaws and a little bit more structure around what we're going to be putting together. I also am going to see if we can get put together a good overview of each property to include kind of the status in general of how things look out there. We know we have 2 vacant units, 1 at each property, kind of what the status is of that, as well as some general information about the programs that the two, like what the differences are between the 2 programs that the 2 properties operate out of. To post for the 20th, I will not have the benefit of the meeting I'm having with HUD on the 18th. And so I'll have to think about how to post a conversation about that, knowing that I don't have the information that I would want to put in an agenda item. Is there anything else you can think of that you would like for a meeting on the 20th?
If we have some of those documents from the previous executive director.
What do you mean by
Like
documents from the previous executive director?
If he had some sort of process to his agreements, like, is that available to us? His financials?
So financials, audits, all of that, as I get access to that, I will create a way to put those on so that they're accessible to everyone.
Okay, cool.
They're accessible on the federal government side, but it's just pulling them out of systems and figuring out a way to make them digestible on our side. I don't think anything existed as far as how he was evaluating the projects to make a recommendation, at least nothing that I saw.
Okay.
And I've gone through, I think, 100 and some odd documents, 150 some odd documents that he's given over in the last week. So I haven't seen anything along those lines
Okay.
to help guide us. And again, that's really going to be for you guys to decide, right? Not necessarily for us to have to carry water that was held before. So bylaws, general executive director search, and then property assessment for both of the, if nothing else, it will be for Pete Dressen and Charles Young. Opal Point might come after that. Anything else that you guys are thinking about? Okay, we have one more item that is an actual action item.
Do you need me to call it?
I'm hoping that my friends, there we go, that my friends in the back will, I don't have the agenda in front of me. Can you tell me what the agenda item says, please?
Yep. Agenda item number 6, consider approval of a resolution partially lifting the suspension of the Kyle Housing Authority's agreement with Making a Difference in Property Management LLC and/or Stephen Colella to continue work in a limited capacity to effectuate transition to a new property management company.
Thank you for reading that, so I didn't have to. So from what we can tell by our records, the Housing Authority first entered into this agreement with MDP in 2021 for management of its properties with Steve Colella as the executive director. On July 11th, Mayor Travis Mitchell appointed new commissioners as authorized by state law to replace the commissioners whose terms had expired. July 14th, Mr. Colella submitted his 60-day notice of contract termination for his 3 management agreements, one for Charles Young, one for Pete Dressen, and one for Opal Point. On July 17th, the commissioners voted to pause the services of MDP to allow for a review of performance and other contract terms. Since July 17th, I have been working with HUD and our partners with HACA, and have identified a need to really functionally lift the suspension of MDP's property of some elements of their property management services to facilitate successful transition to a new company and really to keep the paper flowing with HUD. So what we're looking at is executing a new agreement with MDP to perform only those services specified below at the request and discretion of the board and or the interim executive director. That's really continued administration of the HUD and USDA systems until a new management company gains access. Cooperation with software access to RealPage, which is part of the property management services that they had that allows us to access in and give them the data that needs to go into what goes to HUD. He'll correct me if I'm wrong. And then really to facilitate orderly transition of all banking and financial administrative actions to allow us to transition to a new company. So this would be authorizing me to execute a new agreement with MDP specifically for these very finite services. It would be structured, I think ideally on a month-to-month basis that would allow us to ensure that we're able to process the monthly required reportings to HUD for the 2 properties with a goal of getting this transition done as effectively and quickly as possible. Mr. Colella, I spoke with him earlier this afternoon, and he's in favor of this and is approving of this. He's going to be submitting a proposal to me in the next day or 2 to get this done. So I don't have a dollar amount on this, but I think from looking at his previous billings for the prior agreements, it was about $3,000 per month per property. And so I don't think it will be, it shouldn't be more than that for sure. If it's not a reasonable amount, then we will be having additional conversations. But really, in order to continue to have the documentation flow up to HUD so that we can continue to have the funds flow down to us from HUD, we will need to continue his services in a very limited capacity. So the options in front of you are to approve the resolution or deny the resolution, and staff recommends approval.
Great. I so move that we approve it. Is there a second?
I second that.
All right. All those in favor?
Any discussion?
Any discussion?
It looks like Commissioner
Do you have
Garza may have a
discussion,
comment, may
Ms.
have a
Garza?
question. I don't want to
No,
presuppose.
well, I just, I see the limited capacity, what you're referring to, and I'm assuming there's no timeline right now of the full transition to provide.
So what I talked to him about today is covering August, and I think of these in terms of rent payments, like payment of rent in August, payment of rent in September, probably payment of rent in October. And I would like to see us have a new executive director on board or in the process of onboarding by then. But if we make a decision to have this go through an extensive procurement process, then that may take us into November. But my goal would be my goal would be more like the October timeframe. Mr. Colella's 60-day notice took him into basically up through September 15th, which would be collection of rents in September and processing of those. And I told him that is not realistic, that we would need that extra month for sure to be able to ensure that we have adequate time for transition. And he was agreeable to that and agreeable to this even going into November if we needed it to. We really appreciate his willingness to work with us on this point. Let's just be very clear about what we're talking about though. It's system-based, it's HUD system-based. The day-to-day interaction with our residents will be handled through asset management partners, through AMP and their employee, Talicia, who is here in the audience today. So that the face of the Housing Authority for the City of Kyle is not going to be MDP. It would be us, y'all, AMP, and Talicia. They would just be in the background pushing buttons on computers to make things go where they needed to go.
And thank you again, if I can just say something really quick. I could see that the residents really do trust you in this process. I could see how scary it is, and to have you around probably made them feel a lot better. So thank you.
Good. Thank you so much.
And Mr. Roth reminded me that I want to say that transitioning property management with HUD in their systems is not fast.
Oh, of course.
Great.
And so
good to
that
know.
in and of itself is a couple of months. And so if they have their druthers, we tell them what we want to do, and 2 months later they give us approval on a good day. So we're very mindful of needing to act with a quickness, and so that is how we will be proceeding. But we've got to make sure that we're taking care of business right now.
Do we have some sort of contract that we're going to set forth?
So the base agreement that I would be looking to use would be what we use with the City of Kyle, but it would be between the Housing Authority for the City of Kyle and MDP.
Okay, thank you.
Just
right.
making sure there's safeguards and oversights, and we just want to
We're
make
all
sure-
there.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other discussions? No? Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is there anything, I don't think there's anything else that was on our posted agenda. We covered the wrap-up item that I wanted to talk about, which was the next meeting. And so I think that is all the business you have before you today.
Wonderful. Well, with that, we will be adjourning at 5:36 p.m. Thank you so much.